In a world where the only few active online arcade FPS games are cursed with overtuned aim assist and strict skill-based matchmaking, a new arcade movement shooter inspired by the likes of Titanfall 2 and Black Ops 3 is planned to release into early access later this year. This game is called Empulse and it's being developed by 1047 Games. The game was just announced, so there's no gameplay available for it just yet. However, there are a few screenshots available on the game's Steam store page, so I'll be showing that throughout this video. And if the studio 1047 Games sounds familiar to you, well, it's because they're the developers of Splitgate 2, and there goes half the viewers. So if you're not aware, 1047 Games got a bad reputation last year at Summer Games Fest, as the CEO started to talk down about AAA studios, which did get an applause, but the moment he stepped off the stage, a trailer played for Splitgate 2 announcing a battle royale, which is just more of the same thing that we've seen from AAA studios. And while I do think the overall backlash against Splitgate 2 and 1047 Games is a bit overblown, unfortunately it was a big enough hit in reputation that Splitgate 2 never really got back its audience. That being said, Splitgate 2 is a solid game overall, but even so, it just isn't for me, with it being inspired by Halo, and having moon gravity, which means that you're going to be floating in the air every time you jump. It just doesn't really hit the mark for me. I never really liked that kind of system. And don't get me wrong, I do like a good Halo game, but for me to actually sit there and play those kind of games for hours on end and have it be my main game, it's just never going to be it. And even though Splitgate 2 does have a twist with this portal system that allows you to go from one side of the map to the other, the overall gameplay and gunplay just feels very basic to me. Just more about knowing where to set your portals and having map knowledge, and that's about it. There's just nothing there in the overall gameplay loop that makes it fun to want to stay there for more than a couple hours at a time. So I could launch Splitgate 2, I can have fun playing it, but after about 2 or 3 hours, that's about it for me for the week, and then maybe I'll jump in next week if I don't forget that I still have it installed. So with that said, does Empulse have a chance? And one thing to say real quickly is that Empulse is not Splitgate 3. It's going to be its own game, and it's not going to feel the same way that Splitgate 2 does. And again, we can look at what Empulse is being inspired by, which is Titanfall 2 and Black Ops 3. So while Empulse is not going to be the Titanfall 3 we want, I don't think Respawn can even make a good Titanfall 3 at this point. The reason why I say that is because Respawn is also the developers of Apex Legends, and if you ever look at any news that's going on for that game, you'll see that everyone has been complaining about aim assist being overtuned and basically throwing mouse and keyboard players out the window, as well as the developers not really addressing strict skill-based matchmaking. And if you think Respawn would make a Titanfall 3 game without strong aim assist, without skill-based matchmaking, you're just delusional. All of these issues that Apex Legends is suffering from would be ported directly into the Titanfall 3, because the developers care more about charts at this point than they do about their player base or trying to make mouse and keyboard worth playing on. So yeah, Titanfall 3 may still end up being a fun game if you're on controller and abusing aim assist, but that's about it. It would kind of lose its charm for anyone that's trying to play it on mouse and keyboard. And to be fair, at the same time, we don't really know how Empulse is going to be balanced. However, I don't really see anyone talk about aim assist being overpowered in Splitgate 2, so I kind of doubt that that's going to be the case for Empulse. And then speaking of Splitgate 2, I really do hope that Empulse has a different system for the game's gravity. I really do hope that the game's gravity is stronger and less floaty and feels more kinetic. It's not that I want the game to feel faster than Splitgate 2, but I don't want to be jumping in the air and be stuck in the air for 5 or 10 seconds because that's just how slow the gravity works. I kind of want it to feel more grounded in that sense, having a double jump, having a wall run, having the grapple hook, all these things we know are already in Empulse. I just hope that the gravity doesn't feel too light or too slow, and I can be able to just hop back on and off the ground without feeling like a helium balloon. But what about player numbers? What kind of player numbers does Empulse have to hit in order to remain alive? And I think the best way to figure that out is to look at another game called The Finals. The Finals is still around with a consistent 24-hour peak of 15,000 concurrent players on any given day. So while it's not blowing the doors off of the AAA industry, it is able to keep a strong enough player base that allows the developers to keep the lights on and provide updates, bundles, seasons, maps, and so on and so forth. So chances are, if Empulse can hit that anywhere between 10 to 20,000 current players, I think it would be able to stick around for a fairly long time. And of course, I have to mention real quickly all of the basics. The game has to have good servers, It has to have decent netcode, especially in a game that has movement like this. It has to have some good feeling gunplay, something that's not too basic like it was in Splitgate 2, something that has a little more depth than that, and a game that can feel competitive and still fun to play regardless of your skill level. So I do hope they have some party modes or a map editor or something there that can be fun for anyone regardless of their skill. Another thing to bring up is that there have been talks online from those who got to playtest it, of course without breaking NDA. All of the feedback so far seems to be positive, but a few have noted that the game was in a pre-alpha state. So while the base game is fun, there may be some concerns about a lack of polish and a lack of content available once the game comes out in early access. So depending on how solid the game feels when it's publicly available is going to be a different story. Personally, I do think that if you have a game that is fun to move around in and is fun to play, that should be more than enough to keep players around. Unfortunately, Empulse is tackling the movement shooter, which has kind of died off for quite a while, with Apex Legends really being the only game available at this point in time. You can make an argument that the Finals is also a movement shooter, but that really does depend on the class that you're playing and the gadgets you're using. You don't necessarily have to be good at movement, and you also don't necessarily have to be great at aiming in order to be a good player in the Finals. So if 1047 games can bring some of that over into Empulse, then they might be able to bridge that gap between the casual and the competitive player and have a fun little sandbox here that can serve both sides of the community. As for me, I am dying to have a competitive shooter. I don't mind if it's a movement shooter. I don't care if the time to kill is medium to long. I just want something that feels solid to play, that doesn't have floating physics or floating gravity like Splitgate 2, and something where the gunplay can feel challenging but rewarding at the same time. And while I'm not the biggest fan of melee builds, I'm perfectly fine if there are one or two melee builds that can be made and that are viable in Empulse. However, I hope that the developers don't go overboard in balancing like we see in the Finals. And I'm just not going to go into that in too much detail because that's just another video. I already made that video. I don't want to revisit that topic if I don't have to. But long story short, I don't want to see 1047 games try to make every weapon viable in Empulse or meta. I believe that you can have a few gimmicky weapons, even if they are melee, even if they are an SMG, just something that is a little underpowered, but still very fun and rewarding to use because of how much more skill it takes to get a kill with it. You know, a little bit of skill mixed with luck. And that's about all of the information we have right now about this game. There are a few other videos and information out there if you want to look around, but overall, it's too early to tell how this game is going to be, how it's going to play out. And I really hope that 1047 games can find their footing with Empulse, and that Empulse can be, maybe not the biggest game ever, but a game that can definitely stick around, find its audience, and have a competitive and fun game that appeals to players like me. So let me know what you guys think about this game. Do you think it has a chance at all? Do you think it's too far gone because of the developers? Or do you think that arcade movement shooters are dead and no one wants it unless it's another Titanfall game? Let me know all that in the comments below. And until then, until we get more news, I am Mr. Rain. Now, I'll see you guys next time.